Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started. Thank you for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. My name is Ariel Khan. I am an instructor in AI ethics here, and I also do a lot of work around AI in the military and have been for about a decade now. I will be serving as today's moderator. For recording purposes, today's date is Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. The panel time is 1 p.m., and the panel title is New World, New Arsenal. Before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, by educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, and by consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you once again. Welcome to CWA and today's discussion. Yes, we also ask that all our attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. Please also silence your phones. Time will be allotted for questions from our in-person audience. We will take your questions via handwritten note cards. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and a producer will give you a note card and a pencil. Please print legibly, then raise your hand when you have a completed card, and a producer will collect it and bring it to me. And now I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and I remind our audience that full speaker bios can be found online at the CWA website. So Sophia, we'll start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophia Romansky, and I am a strategic analyst at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, which is a think tank based in the Netherlands. At the think tank, I work as a researcher that focuses on all issues related to artificial intelligence, with a specific focus also on the role of AI in the military domain. Related to this, for the last 2 years, I was the project coordinator and pen holder for the Global Commission on Responsible AI in the Military Domain, which was an initiative that was launched by the government of the Netherlands in the context of Re-AIM, which is a summit series trying to answer questions about what it means to use AI responsibly in the military domain. Aside from this, I am also a guest expert for the NATO Defense Education Enhancement Program, where we are working on the development of a reference curriculum for allies and member states on what it means to use AI as a tool for military power. As a final note about my background, aside from all of these different topics, I also have a pet topic where I look at epistemic responsibility in the age of AI, looking at what it means to create knowledge when we have access to tools that can process vast amount of information for us, and where human responsibility lies when it comes to information and communication. Very much looking forward to this panel, and thank you so much for having me.
Hello, I'm Ken Liu. I'm a writer and a futurist. My background is in technology, and I still work extensively with technology companies and with the writers' organizations in thinking about the implications of AI going forward. I've also done extensive work with governments and think tanks on the implications of AI in a variety of domains. I've served as an expert with the UN and the Pentagon, advising them on various aspects of AI. And I speak extensively about my own vision for what AI can do. I tend to be an optimist on what the implications are, which sometimes makes me a rare voice. So hopefully I will say something that will give you a little more hope today. So I'm looking forward also to being part of the panel.
Good afternoon. I want to thank CWA for inviting me to participate in this really very interesting set of panels. My name is Bob Latiff. I'm a retired Air Force two-star general. I started my career in the Army, in the infantry, stationed near the Fulda Gap in Germany, where we were waiting for the Soviet Union to overtake Western Europe. And if they tried, we were going to nuke them. So my next assignment was as a commander of a nuclear weapons unit, also in Germany. After that, I taught engineering at West Point for a couple of years, and then transferred to the Air Force, which was sort of unusual. But in my 26 years in the Air Force, I spent 26 years basically doing research, development, and procurement of new weapon systems. Most of my work has been in the space and intelligence arena. Just down the road from here in Colorado Springs, I commanded the Cheyenne Mountain operations. And as my retirement assignment, I was in charge of all science and technology at the National Reconnaissance Office. Post-retirement, I spent a few unhappy years in industry. Then I began teaching and consulting. I taught at Notre Dame, mostly in the area of new weapons technologies, ethics, and the laws of war, about which I've written a couple of books, the second of which focused pretty heavily on artificial intelligence in military command and control systems, something very worrisome. I'm now working on another book on tactical nuclear weapons, but that's for a different time. Thank you.
Wow. Working on another book. Wow, impressive. My name is Joe Cirincione. I publish a Substack newsletter called Strategy and History. I serve as the vice chairman of the Center for International Policy in Washington, D.C. I spent about 45 years in Washington working on national security and nuclear policy. I did congressional investigations into nuclear systems and some of our large conventional weapon systems for the House Armed Services Committee, the Government Operations Committee. I ran nuclear policy projects at 3 different think tanks. I had trouble finding a job, so I became president of a foundation called the Plowshares Fund, where I advocated for the reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons. I still write, lecture, and occasionally teach on this subject. I first came to CWA, I believe it was in 2007, so I thank you very much for continuing to invite me back. I hope I'll be back next year as well. Pleasure to be here.
All right, well, thank you all. I am excited to get started with this discussion. So as a reminder, this is New World, New Arsenal. And I think in order to really understand what New World, New Arsenal means, we also need to understand what more conventional systems are. So Sophia, I was hoping you could start that off for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And also from my experience in my work, I assume everyone here is coming from a completely different background with different understandings of how the world looks like and what reality, especially the military reality, looks like. And so I'm going to do my best in as short a time as possible to bring us all onto the same page so that we can think about things in a similar way. And hopefully then the speakers on my right can contribute and kind of build on this foundation of shared understanding. And so when we think about a conventional arsenal, you have kind of strict definitions that exist. You have conventional weapons, which are, you think guns, bombs, tanks, those kind of things which have been part of military activity for already decades in the past. And of course, military tools and arsenals constantly evolve. You also have a concurrent category, which is referred to as non-conventional weapons, but they would still fall into the old arsenal in this conversation, but these are weapons that are more strictly controlled, especially by the Geneva Conventions and other regulations. Think nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. And what we see with what we would think of as kind of the existing arsenal of weapons is they often evoke a very specific image of war, right? A confrontation of mass on a battlefield between opposing forces that are primarily coming from states, right? So states are the warring parties that are using certain tools, weapons to conflict with each other and to have somebody emerge victorious. We also have kind of a conceptualization of automation, right? It's not that, and I'm sure this will come up in the rest of the conversation today, there are certain degrees of conventional weapons and existing arsenals that are automated, right? That when a missile is launched, there is some kind of autonomy in determining where that missile is going to land. Like think a ballistic missile, right? There is autonomy in it following its trajectory, both because of built-in systems, but also the way like that physics work, right? Humans are not the ones that are literally like, the most direct thing, like stabbing a knife into someone. But what we now see is that when we talk about a new arsenal, it is not necessarily the case that it is an entirely new set of technologies. Rather, the components of technologies, for example, artificial intelligence as a set of capabilities, is becoming integrated into things that already exist. And with this, certain processes that are very standard, kind of like basic military theory, are being accelerated, and what we're seeing is changes in speed, scale, and reach. Those are kind of the three words that we always see when we enter conversations about the new arsenal, that we are having technologies that act as force multipliers and are able to cut across domains, let's say, integrate different data sources, and in that sense make, I hope we'll debate this later as well, but make better use of the information that we have in our battle spaces. So I hope this answers your question, Ariel, and sets enough of a platform for us.
Yes, thank you. And I also want to pass this question to General Ladif. In your experience, what are you seeing as some of the big changes and shifts that are happening just in the last couple of years, or even the last couple of months?
Let's try the last couple of years. It's almost trite to say AI, but I think we have seen a dramatic increase in the implementation of AI systems and weapons, not all of which are being done with proper care. And most recently, we've heard that the military actually say that in some aspects of the nuclear command and control system, artificial intelligence is beginning to show up. So I think the implementation of AI has probably been the biggest. That isn't to diminish in any way the very unique ways in which Ukraine is employing drones. So drone warfare, while it's been around for a number of years, in the last couple of years, it's skyrocketed.
Thank you. And Joe, I want to pass it to you next, especially on the topic of nuclear. What's conventional and what has changed there?
I think there's two changes that we're seeing just in the last 10, 15 years. One's very small and one is very, very large. And the small is drone warfare. This has fundamentally changed the battlefield. There's a saying in the US military, if we can see it, we can kill it. We have exquisite precision-guided munitions, but they tend to be large munitions. What the Ukraine war and now the Iran war is showing us is that you can see it and kill it with very small devices. The general just mentioned the upsurge in drone manufacturing by Ukraine. At the beginning of this war, they made about 10,000 drones a year. This year, they made 6 million. 6 million drones. In the beginning of this war, the technology that was defeating the Soviet tank armies were the Javelin anti-tank missile, a very sophisticated tank missile that stopped the armored assault in its tracks. Now it's drones dropping grenades. If there is a tank on the battlefield, it is dead instantly. I'm not saying tanks are obsolete because people make a lot of money building tanks. They cost about $6 million a pop. But a $10,000 drone, a drone that costs maybe the cost of 2 or 3 cell phones, can kill that tank. So you don't see tanks on the Ukrainian battlefield. Look at what Iran is doing with cheap, relatively $20,000 a copy Shahed drones. And what are we using to counter that? $2 million interceptors. That is not a winning ratio, which is why President Zelensky just made a triumphant tour of the Gulf states offering his anti-drone technology because they have cheap anti-drones that can shoot down the Iranian Shahed drones. This is where warfare is going in all its aspects with AI. Okay, that's the small one. The big one is nuclear weapons. We've gotten used to authoritarian regimes acquiring nuclear weapons. But now we have nuclear-armed states acquiring authoritarian regimes. For the first time in the history of the nuclear age, the vast majority of nuclear weapons are held by states with authoritarian leaders. At the beginning of this century, there was one authoritarian state with nuclear weapons, that was China. Russia was still a fledgling democracy. That failed. North Korea had not yet acquired nuclear weapons. Now, 7 of the 9 states that have nuclear weapons have authoritarian leaders: Russia, China, North Korea, India, Pakistan, Israel, and the United States. What does that mean? Our nuclear strategies were not designed for this world. The entire premise of nuclear deterrence is that democracies could be entrusted as responsible stewards of nuclear weapons because of our moral values, our value for life, the fact that we were not territorially aggressive, we were not trying to conquer other countries. We needed these nuclear weapons to deter this rapacious, aggressive, immoral authoritarian states. What happens when we're the authoritarian state? What does that do? What does that mean? What does that mean for people who are engaged in the nuclear enterprise? Would you build a nuclear bomb for Hitler? For Putin? For Trump? Can you trust those leaders to be responsible stewards? We have not even begun to confront that issue.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I want to hear.
No, I just wanted to go back to my answer to the previous question. The one that I left out, I think, is important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked for a buy here. And that is space. Since the creation of the Space Force by President Trump, space has become a very big area of contention and probably will play a much larger role in any future conflicts.
Okay, thank you. I'm definitely going to want to come back to a lot of this. But before I do, there's one more sort of considering what's old and what's new. And Ken, I want to go to you for this. Because you have the background in constitutional law and technology, one of the arguments that we see a lot, I know Sophia and I have seen this a lot, is law exists, and regardless of the technology, it still needs to be upheld. How do you see that actually playing out?
Actually, I was hoping that Sophia can talk first a little bit about how AI may be expanding the space of conflict and new places for conflict before I talk about that.
We had some really good conversations before the panel. Yeah, but I think this makes sense also based on what both of the previous speakers said. What I said about conventional weapons and what we think of as conventional weapons are boundaries that were put over technologies that exist in a very concrete period of time. And we are now in a period where specifically, and also this was the focus of my work, artificial intelligence is blurring almost every single boundary and definition that we had. And specifically what I want to zoom in on is the boundary between the battlefield and the home, where we are right now. Because if we look at the future of conflict, we are seeing the trends already that are so important. Drones are weapons that are being used in creative ways, and it is more of a battle of attrition, right? How well is your economy able to adjust to conflict and produce at mass relatively cheaply and implement these things effectively? But when I think about what war is going to look like in the future, I don't imagine just drones or autonomous weapons, ground vehicles, aerial vehicles, Shaheds flying around. I don't imagine just a confrontation of autonomous systems, because also, unfortunately, and I'm sure this was also very much implied by the other speakers, war is a human invention. And as long as war will remain a human invention and also a human endeavor, meaning that humans still are the ones making the decision go to war. And if states are also the primary actors, along with non-state actors that are participating in war, then the targets of conflict are also going to shift back from the battlefield. I'm not saying that there aren't going to be battlefields, but it's going to be more important to target things where humans are still active. As much as we might want to automate war, and this is also something that I don't agree with, like why are we prioritizing becoming better at killing rather than using AI to de-escalate? But really, we are going to see, I predict that there will be a rise in what is called hybrid threats, and that hybrid threats, which nowadays blur the boundary between hot conflict, explicit confrontation, and kind of a state of non-peace, that will become the norm, meaning that people will become targets in their homes. And this can happen in various different ways, from targeting infrastructure, especially in the context of AI. Data centers will become primary targets for various means, data poisoning, actual damage, or kind of intercepting energy supply. But also, for me, what is most concerning and especially impactful in the age of AI as kind of like a new arsenal, and that is the use of artificial intelligence for cognitive warfare. The ability of malicious actors to influence the way that we perceive and interact with reality itself, undermining the fabrics of society that are the fundamental part of democratic societies, right? Our ability to participate in society with each other, to have conversations. These are the things that can then progressively be targeted using generative AI especially, but also other things, simpler versions of artificial intelligence. And so the conflict, the onus of conflict I predict is going to shift with this new arsenal, because we're also going to have to think about other targets. So I hope, Ken, you like that?
Perfect. That was amazing. So I want to follow up on the comments so far and sort of work out the implications of all of these trends in two small ways. So one of them, it has to do with the idea of institutional or democratic control of power. So one of the very ironic things about our nuclear arsenal is that it is, in fact, subject to the control of a single person, and that was by design. President Truman, during the Cold War, wanted to set up the nuclear deterrent in that way because he was terrified of the alternative. A slow, congressionally controlled response is not going to work. It will not serve as an effective deterrent. That particular structure for our nuclear arsenal has persisted to this day. Now, as we have mentioned, there are implications about whether this is, in fact, the right answer, whether this actually encourages the kind of reckless kind of responses around the world that we're seeing. But what is the alternative? What is the alternative to putting so much power in a democracy? Should it be under the control of a single person or not? We don't really have a good answer for this, and this is something we're going to have to think about. And in the age of AI, this may become even more problematic as an issue as we defer responsibility for decisions on killing to systems, machines, and other institutions that are not subject to any kind of democratic control. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it, working directly off of Sophia's comment, is this. We go to war to preserve our way of life and our institutions. It will be the greatest of tragedies if, in war, we become like our enemies, in which case, even if we win, we have lost. And that is one of the greatest concerns I have about the weaponization of cognitive warfare, as we discuss here. Cognitive warfare has a tendency to justify responses that are wildly out of proportion to the actual threat itself. And it can become an easy excuse for all kinds of policies that are deeply destructive to the fabric of our own civil society. So we've seen this sort of thing happen in the past, right? President Lincoln was famous for suspending habeas corpus during the Civil War. It was not constitutional, everybody agrees with it, and we simply allow it because in war you can do things that you think needs to be done. Now, what if our government decides that the risk of cognitive warfare by our adversaries is so huge that we must use our own AI companies to generate propaganda to immunize Americans against foreign propaganda? In fact, the government must engage in a systemic campaign of lying to the American people in order to win. There is no constitutional prohibition against this. So should we think about restriction on that? Should we live in a world in which our government lies to us in the name of winning? These are all things that we have barely started to think about. And I think as we think through the implications of the expansion of warfare into new domains, what are responses we're willing to tolerate? What are the kind of responses that we can deal with before we cease to be Americans?
And if I could super briefly follow up on that, not only do we have to think about can we trust our leaders to be responsible, but we also have to think about the ways that the technology itself promotes and amplifies certain incentives and behaviors. Arguably, and there's research that's just starting to emerge on this, that generative AI actually lowers the threshold for propaganda because it's so easy to create a new reality and to visualize it and to bring it to life, right? Often it can take like just a couple of prompts to create your vision of what the world should look like, and then that can be peddled to a wide audience through social media. And so all of these elements of a stack, they pile onto each other. And we're already seeing this in action in many of the authoritarian states that were mentioned in the previous intervention. So it's about the moment in history that we are in right now, where we already had a lot of problems with democratic backsliding, distrust in democracy. And then we have a set of technologies that come along that make it a lot easier to then feed into these patterns and use it, unfortunately, for the worse, rather than for us to gain more access to information, become more aware, more informed, and more critical of the systems that we are a part of. So that's just an addition to Ken.
So I'm starting to get a bunch of questions from the audience. General Latif or Joe, did either of you want to weigh in on any of this yet?
What was just said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of go, Ken and Sophia have been talking about cognitive warfare. I'd like to step back a little bit and talk about the role of AI in decisions to go to war, command and control systems, for lack of a better term. My concern is that, like Sophia said, sometimes AI systems can, if they're purpose directed, they will do everything they can to achieve what they set out to do. and command and control and decisions to resort to violence, that's actually pretty important. And in my mind, it then begins to start bumping up against the laws of armed conflict. When we talk about decisions to go to war, we talk about things like right intention and correct the person who is actually responsible, which don't make any sense for an AI system, because an AI system can't have an intention. It can't be responsible. And so my concern is with AI is less about cognitive warfare, which is important, but it's actually the implementation of these systems in military systems. And we have to be very careful when we implement them, and apparently we're not being very careful.
2 quick points. One, in preparation for this panel, I read the January memorandum from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on AI implementation. The DoD is spending a lot of money. They issued 4 contracts worth about $250 million each to companies to develop their AI strategy. And if you read the January memo, it's filled with the warrior ethos talk that Pete Hegseth has, and it is a chilling memo. It emphasizes speed, developing AI capabilities, and rushing them into the field. That would seem to be the very last thing you would want to do, but this is the very first thing. It also talks about developing these technologies, and I quote, free of usage policy constraints. Well, that's what caused Anthropic to decline to participate in this program, because they want usage policy constraints. They want human intervention in the AI decision. They did not want their technology to be used for killer robots, autonomous weapon systems, or for mass surveillance of the American population. But that is exactly what the Department of Defense intends. Okay, that's chill number 1. Chill number 2. When most of us think about the president making a decision to use nuclear weapons, we think of the movies that we've seen, like the recent brilliant movie, House of Dynamite, which is on Netflix, which I recommend, which in my view, very accurately, some issues, very accurately depicts what it would be like if North Korea launched a ballistic missile at it. The military detects it. There's a quick conference about this detection. It gets quickly brought up to the chain of command. You have a conference is convened. The Secretary of Defense is there. The Joint Chiefs of Staff is there. The President is brought in. There's debate about what the options should be. Right. But that system also can work in reverse. If we initiate nuclear usage, there is no conference. There is no discussion. There could be, but there doesn't have to be. It is a very short command chain. The Secretary of Defense is not in it. The Congress is not in it. The Chief of Staff is not in it. The President is followed 24/7 by an officer who carries the nuclear football, which has the launch options that he has. 24/7. This person has to be within a minute of the President. If Trump gets in an elevator, this officer gets in the elevator with him. It's designed, as the General said, for speed of response. This is the essence of our deterrence. The enemy has to know if they attack us, we will respond immediately without question. Assured destruction. The President just has to open that up. He calls up the National Command Center. He identifies himself by pulling out a card that he calls the biscuit, which has a code that identifies him as the President of the United States. He gives the order to the officer on the other head. Could be a general, could be a colonel, who's ever on duty at that time. He gives the order, Alpha, Beta, Omega. The launch order is legally vetted. It's a legal order. The plan of attack, whatever it is, 1, 10, 1,000 missiles, is then transmitted to the Strategic Command, who implements it. Within 4 minutes of the President's order, missiles are flying. So it all comes down to, do you trust that President? Right. The question answers itself. The next time we get control of the White House, we have to change that archaic Cold War system that is completely out of touch with current realities. We may have to make sure that it is not one man who's in charge of the decision to go to nuclear war. We have to have congressional hearings to come up with a better system that ensures that one lunatic can't end all of humanity in 4 minutes.
I would just like to follow that up a little bit. That's a scary scenario, and it is spot on. However, you may recall General Mark Milley.
Yep.
Several years ago, when he thought that this president was going to do something crazy, called the Joint Chiefs of Staff, called the Joint Chiefs together, and basically said to them, "I am not in your chain of command. I know that. But should you get this order before you implement it, call me." What that would have done, I don't know. Would it have made a difference? I don't know. But there are people in the system, increasingly few because they're being purged from the system, but I believe that there are people in the system, should an event like that occur, would do their very best to try to postpone it and delay it.
30 seconds. I completely agree, and we've been reassured for years that the barrier to a crazy president issue an order is that military officer would refuse an illegal order, right? The problem we have is that the president understands that, and as you say, he and Pete Hegg said, they fired 24 flag officers. 24. In the entire history of the Department of Defense, 6 have been fired. This man has fired 24 for this reason. Second, we now have a history of the military obeying illegal orders. We just killed our 50th boat in the Caribbean. That is an illegal order. We have people doing it.
I know.
Okay? So that barrier is there, but it's when a very short chain of command with 3 people involved, you're really rolling the dice. And if anyone is going to refuse the order.
And if I could also add to this, expanding the conversation beyond just a very concrete part of the chain of command, I think what Ken and I were saying also about the cognitive dimension of artificial intelligence, it's blurring the boundary between people as military staff and individuals using AI. And unfortunately, the way that artificial intelligence, specifically generative artificial intelligence, so think your large language models that I'm sure many of you have interacted with, they incentivize people to do something what is referred to as cognitive offloading, meaning that people are less eager to do the difficult thinking on their own. They prompt it and passively accept the response that is given to them by the model. This has already shown to significantly reduce critical thinking capabilities in people, and meaning that, well, you could have systems in place within the military that would hopefully motivate people to go against an illegal order. But if we take a step back, can we even trust that the people can still recognize what is an illegal order if a lot of their thinking is already pre-processed? And I'm not saying that this is the case right now, but we're on a dangerous path that potentially this could be the future. And then you have people in the chain of command who are ultimately supposed to be the ones who will be held accountable when something goes wrong, but they don't understand how a decision was made because they're dealing with technologies that are inherently intransparent, they're opaque, they're black boxes, as often referred to, but they're also not feeling moral responsibility for the decisions that they're making because so much around them has become automated. And so for me, like, that's the blurring boundary where even the little habits that we build in our everyday interactions with these technologies that appear in both the military and the civilian sides, they bleed into each other, and we have to rethink human responsibility as a whole. And in the military domain, it's just so concrete because it concerns decisions of life and death very directly. But in other contexts of life, like think doctors, right? That's also life and death, just in a different way. So when it comes specifically to AI, and I understand that there's a lot more to a new arsenal than just artificial intelligence, but because it's so omnipresent, it has so many impacts at the same time that again, as I said, accumulate and build on each other.
I would just like to add a very important postscript to that, is that at the end of the day, when you're talking about military operations, the commanders of the units involved are responsible. They have a moral responsibility, and if things go bad, they are held accountable, or should be held accountable for things going bad.
Okay, we have a ton of questions here. I'm going to try to pick a couple that I think connect to what we've been discussing. So one is this idea of human oversight. Joe, going back to an earlier comment you had made, Anthropic claims that they wanted human oversight, but I think their technology is very, very difficult to actually oversee for a human. So what does that mean? How do we implement oversight for AI-enabled systems, especially like these decision support systems? And then this might be a little bit of a stretch, but as we're trying to consider what human oversight looks like, do we need to also be reconsidering how we're defining war crimes? And does anyone want to answer that?
To just do the oversight, Sophia, you can, or our moderator can answer this better than I can, but I think so. Oversight is going to get extremely difficult on this. You know, the drive for killer robots is irresistible at this point. So we're looking at drones, right? So we, in the Ukrainian battlefield, we have drones that are radar guided. So Ukraine sending out drones are radar guided. The Russians have electronic countermeasures. They jam those electronic signals so the drones fall out of the sky. So to counter that, you can only do one of two things. One, you can go back to old fiber optic technology, put a fiber optic cable on that drone and send it forward, so now it can't be jammed, right? So you're getting a signal, a cable signal, or you program it with a version of artificial intelligence to go identify, select, and destroy the target. And this is where it's going. And these things exist now, autonomous killer drones. The Israelis have one they call Pitbull. It's not a flying drone, it's like about the size of this table. It's tank-like treads on it with a machine gun on it. And you send it, and it goes where humans can't go. And it looks for the target, and then it kills the target. And this seems inevitable that we're going to be driven towards this because of the electronic countermeasures atmosphere you're operating in. You're going to go more and more autonomous, small ones, big ones, plane-sized ones. Human oversight over it? Can you be monitoring what they do? Sure, you could be monitoring, but can the enemy hack it and turn it around? This is a nightmare world, and we are rushing into it.
Can I take that question about war crimes? Yes. This is only a personal opinion, but just war theory has been around for millennia, centuries if you want to go back, not that far, but millennia. And the concepts of just war theory have served us through all kinds of improvements in warfare, from sticks and stones to the fourth offset. So I don't think things like proportionality or military necessity or protecting non-combatants from harm really depend at all upon the type of technology that we're talking about. And so getting people, for violating the laws of war is really nothing more than figuring out how to apply those laws to the new technologies.
If I can add 2 points on the keeping humans in the loop for decision making. There are 2 scenarios that I haven't heard brought up, and I think they are interesting to think about. One is the concept of human washing, which is this idea that lower level staff members will take credit for work done by AI. And then as these decisions or results of analysis are passed up the chain, it is impossible for higher level decision makers to tell the difference between intelligence that has been properly assessed by humans versus decisions that are made by machines. In every bureaucratic system, this is the case. In corporate settings, human washing is a major problem where people take credit for work done by AI, and then their supervisors cannot tell the difference. This will happen in a bureaucratic organization like the military. And so I think the failure mode of humans not providing proper oversight is likely to be something extremely mundane, where machines do something and a junior analyst simply pretends that they have done it, and it will go up and become part of a human decision chain. So that's one thing. Another thing I want us to think about is the decision of whether to use AI in weapon systems at all. There's something incredibly interesting about what's happening in this moment. During the Manhattan Project, the decision of whether we're going to build these things and use these things was unquestionably reserved to the military. It was a military decision subject to civilian oversight. Today, that is not the case. Silicon Valley claims that they're building a Manhattan Project, but this is a private endeavor subject to personalities who are not in any way subject to the control of democratic processes. Now, it may sound awesome when you have a Secretary of War like Pete Hegseth for somebody to stand up and say, you cannot use my technology for this thing. But why should the decision be deferred to that person at all? Who elected them? Why is that person making that decision at all? That should be far more troubling to us than the actual decision ultimately to use it or not. It's the process that's the problem here. And I don't know if we have a good solution to this. I mean, is the solution to nationalize these things because they are in fact incredibly dangerous? I'm not sure that's the right answer either. I don't know if we have a good answer for any of this.
I would also like to add, first of all, I completely agree with Major General answering the question about war crimes. The definitions that are provided by international law do not need to change because they are technology agnostic. They apply no matter what the technology is that is being used. But what the problem is the political will. And I think, Joe, you mentioned this as well already, that what are we willing to say and what are we willing to admit as faults? And to what extent do we have technologies at our disposal which through the illusion of thinking, we can shirk responsibilities onto as well. So not only are we offloading cognitive processing, but also the feeling of responsibility. Well, if this thing acts so human because it uses natural language, then it feels like it's also a part in the conversation when by no means can it be held accountable, and never will it be held accountable because it can't. But so a very concrete example from recent times is, I'm sure many of you have seen this, the report from The Guardian about the attack that happened on the girls' school in Iran. A lot of the questions about this was AI involved in the decision making? How did this happen? Can we blame AI? And anytime that I got a question about this, my answer is, it doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome and what happened. And then you establish what went wrong, and maybe there was AI involved. But you shouldn't be asking the question of, what did the technology do to make this go wrong? No, humans went wrong somewhere, and someone needs to be held accountable, and then you figure it out. So, thank you. And this relates directly to what Ken just said. There are more actors than in conventional weapons, the ones that I mentioned at the very beginning, that are involved, more actors that are involved in the production of this new arsenal. And what the work of Ariel and I focuses on is identifying the distinct responsibilities that all of these actors have. Because while international law applies to states, there's also command responsibility and individual criminal liability. We also need to help hold companies accountable within these broader systems. And because a lot of the decisions about that can help us use these technologies responsibly in the military context happen at the earliest stages of research and development. They happen at design, before acquisition and procurement, before the military really steps in if you're looking at a conventional system life cycle. But we need to bring these actors together earlier and earlier to have conversations, and also to make sure that militaries remain the demand makers of what they want for these kind of tools, instead of just taking whatever the supply gives them and trying to fit it into some kind of part of the process. It's about finding problems that exist. Where can we really benefit from the capabilities that are offered by AI? Be that for efficiency, for example, and ask companies to make things that are useful instead of just taking them on and trying to see where they fit. So that's, I think, something that brings all of it together as well.
Thank you. Okay, so we have, oh, you can clap if you want. We've got 20 minutes left. We're doing great. Okay, good. Never mind. All right, so I'm going to combine 3 questions here because I like the scale spectrum that they're looking at. I think it can be very, very daunting to be looking at these problems, especially as an individual citizen who doesn't necessarily have power over any of this stuff that's happening. And so I think these questions can help address that. So one, what is the role that international government organizations can play in trying to address some of this? What specifically should we be asking Congress to do? And do you have tips on things that individuals can be doing to try to push back?
Let me just start with sort of a glib answer. I don't have much to say about the international organizations, but the one thing that Congress could do is to do their job. And it would take a long time to talk about it, but you could go back into the way military oversight is structured and the way Congress presumably engages in military oversight, and they're just not doing it. And so I think that would be the one place to start. And what can you do? Sounds trite and glib, but vote.
%. 100%. So I spent 10 years as a congressional staffer back in the 80s and 90s when we actually had congressional oversight, where we did hearings on the nuclear posture of the United States. There has not been an oversight hearing on U.S. nuclear policy since one hearing that was held in the first Trump administration on this issue of command and control, which ended with bland assurances that the military would refuse an illegal order. We haven't done these kinds of things. We're about to spend $2 trillion on a brand new nuclear arsenal, new missiles, new bombers, new subs, new warheads. Why? For what? How many of these do we need? The F-35, most advanced tactical aircraft in the world, do we need a dog-fighting air superiority fighter anymore? Is that what we should be spending $250 million per unit on at this point? We're already developing the F-47, the next generation, the 6th generation fighter. We're building a brand new manned bomber. Why? Why are we building these things? Is that what you need? At a time when we're developing drone swarms, where you could put out 100, 200 swarms with the use of AI, can operate as a unit? Where's the future of all this is being done with no congressional oversight, no hearings? I believe that the Democrats are going to retake the House of Representatives and maybe even the Senate in the November elections. And we have to insist that Robert Garcia, who will be head of the Government Oversight Committee, that Adam Smith, who will be the head of the House Armed Services Committee, do some serious congressional oversight again. It's the simplest thing. The solutions aren't clear, but the process is crystal clear. Do your job.
If I may, Ariel, I'd just like to say one. I'm looking out there. I can't see the audience very well, but how many of you have friends or family members who are actually in the military today? Today. So one of the things you might ask Congress is, how much money are you allocating for spare parts for my family members, whatever it is they're doing? Spare parts, modern maintenance, training, all of those things that don't end up being high-ticket items that forever, every year, get short shrift.
Yeah.
We're spending a $1.5 trillion, there's a $1.5 trillion budget on the table. I'd like to know how much of it is going to maintenance and such mundane items.
Yeah.
Going to a different part of this question about intergovernmental organizations, I think there's a very big role to play, but as I said, we're in a very specific moment in history where trust for the impact of organizations like, for example, the United Nations is on the decline. But there is still a big role to be played because of the issues that we are trying to solve. Again, apologies that the conversation is so much about artificial intelligence, but AI as a category of technologies in itself is incredibly internationalized. As much as any state might try to nationalize artificial intelligence development within their state, it is not possible to fully nationalize it in any case. Because when thinking about AI, you have to think about the entire stack of what the technology is, which is software, hardware, talent, wetware, as some people refer to it, people, institutions. And you need the critical raw materials that come primarily from the African continent. You need key companies in global supply chains to provide things for you. So apologies to those who were at my previous panel because I'm going to repeat myself, but this is a point that is useful, especially for American audience to kind of think about is the country that I'm based in the Netherlands, we are a choke point for the supply chain of artificial intelligence because of one company, and that company is called ASML. ASML has a monopoly on lithography machines. Those are the machines that are able to print chips, so actually make them. And what happens if that one company goes away? So that gives the Netherlands a disproportionately to the impact of the country role in this supply chain, and it's essential. You can't do without it. And so any time that the United States has to make decisions about nationalizing things, they still have to think about that little country in Europe and that one specific company and make decisions based on that. And so then, because both the technology that we're talking about as well as the impacts of the technology, if we're talking specifically in the context of conflict, but also the global impact that it has on us as humanity, we need global conversations to try and not destroy each other, to have confidence building measures, different than those that we had during the Cold War because we're dealing with a different set of issues, but to still have conversations and try to come to some common solutions, because if war is a human invention, then hopefully we're also going to be trying to not fall into war. And being aware of all those things is essential, and the platforms exist to have those conversations. We just need to make use of those platforms.
For the last couple of questions, I want to focus a little bit more on maybe something that'll be optimistic. Well, and I'll get to that in a minute too, but one question that I did really like was, do we have examples of de-escalation, either practices or weapons that have been working maybe with AI or without? How can we encourage de-escalation? Mm-hmm.
Yes. We used to have the world's largest biological weapons stockpile. With the Soviets, we had the world's largest chemical weapons stockpile. We had enough biological weapons to kill every man, woman, and child on Earth. We got rid of them. Richard Nixon, unilaterally, said we're not going to do this anymore. He then helped negotiate the Biological Weapons Convention, an international agreement, something that's fallen out of favor these days, an international agreement that everybody signed up to. It didn't have any verification. It was just a promise not to do it, and with the intelligence services we have, we could more or less tell if people were cheating. George H.W. Bush negotiated the Chemical Weapons Convention to get rid of our stockpile of deadly nerve agents, the Soviet stockpile of deadly nerve agents. Almost every country in the world has signed up to this. Most of the stockpiles of chemical weapons and biological weapons of the world are gone now. But every major military used to have these weapons. I remember in the House of Representatives when we were debating this, the Big I bomb was the new chemical weapon they wanted to build. We had to have it, the Army said. If we didn't have it, soldiers would die. Gone. We walked that back. So yes, those are two concrete examples of what we can do. And even nuclear weapons, nuclear arms control. We used to have 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world. We don't have 70,000, we have 12,000. Still too many, but arms control between adversaries. negotiated what was in each country's strategic interest to get these weapons and bring them down to manageable levels and hopefully on a path to their elimination. Yes, international agreements can do this. We can control these technologies. They don't have to control us.
That was pretty optimistic.
Yes, yeah, that was great. That was great, thank you. Okay, there are still a few questions, and we've got 10 minutes. So I think I'm going to come to we'll come to this question. Well, so this question is specifically about positive coordination between the U.S. and China regarding biological weapons with AI and CRISPR, but I think I want to expand that a little bit. How do we see some of these powers coming together to try to work together and improve our relations using AI? That wasn't a very well-worded question, but how can we get better? How can we get better coordination between? We'll start with the U.S. and China.
Geez, I thought you would answer that question. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, it's not happening. And part is because of the lack of U.S. leadership. We used to play the leading role in all these things. We're not leading anymore. But what do you work on this more? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I actually think the U.S. and China are just sort of having two different conversations right now. They have very different takes on AI and how they're using AI. And I don't know if you want to weigh in on some of this too. I'm trying to stay back as the moderator.
I think you have full right to take the floor as well, based on what you work on, so please do. But I think also from our work together, what we're seeing is that there is really a vacuum of leadership, and this has always been painted the arms race from the Cold War, now also being referred to as the AI arms race, is seen as something between great powers. But there is a vacuum of leadership on behalf of the great powers right now. And so what you see is actually small and middle powers stepping in to define the conversation. And so the Global Commission that both of us were a part of, and this is just one example, there are many different initiatives specifically for the military domain, but it was spearheaded by the Netherlands, South Korea, Singapore, the United Kingdom, Spain, and Kenya. Those were the countries that got together to lead the conversation, and they are still very much in the driver's seat, recognizing that they have both regional representation, they play key roles in the supply chain, they are also implementing national policies. And so what it is showing for us, and I'll paint this optimistically, is that we don't need to look towards great powers for the answers on how to do things. Just because they supposedly have more power, be that hard power or soft power, however you want to define it, doesn't mean that they're the only ones who can shape the conversation, and that there's a critical mass of all the other states in the world that can also be decisive and define the conversation. So for example, everything that we talk about in terms of meaningful human control and responsibility, so it's responsible AI in the military domain, that is now a known term that emerged from this conversation. So that, to me, is very promising, because then also, as I mentioned in my previous comment, the great powers are also dependent on those smaller powers for many things. And so then at a certain point, you kind of flip the script. The great powers have to follow along with a critical mass of small and middle powers who align themselves with the values and are very intentional about the outcomes that they want to achieve.
If I can bring this part down to the individual level, I think one of the things about the AI conversation that I think is incredibly interesting, again, comparing to the nuclear weapons thing, that was something that really only states could participate in. But this is something that all of us individually can participate in. This is not one of those things that's reserved to governments. So even outside of states, all of us play a role in defining how this is going to go. So for example, AI will not become a critical flaw in the infrastructure if we don't collectively agree to make it into such a flaw. If we, in our own individual daily lives, make decisions about how much cognitive offloading we want to do and how much important decision-making we want to outsource to these machines, we obviously will have an impact on how these technologies are going to be developed, how deeply they embed themselves into our infrastructure, and how much they really influence conflicts. This is not something that only states get to decide. We individually make decisions. And part of that requires us to actually be informed properly. I think one of the things that frustrates me about the AI conversation is we seem to want to have it both ways. When these billionaires say this is an existential threat, the media takes the tone of these nerds are crazy. Only crazy people think that's the case. Ha ha ha, right? And then we turn around and think that these robots are going to steal our jobs. Well, we can't have it both ways. Either it is actually existentially a problem or it is not. But we have to actually become informed individually. You cannot think that you know others to know about AI if your only experience with it is to ask it some question and then have it give you the wrong answer, and you can just dismiss it and think that this is all irrelevant. This is far more complicated than that. The honest truth is no one, not even the most important people working on this technology, fully understand why and how these systems actually work. When I was studying AI, something like 25 years ago in college, the idea that you build a simulation of the brain's structure and then you just feed it a huge amount of data and then have it predict the next token, somehow this system will end up being able to answer bar exam questions and advise you on your relationships and tell the Pentagon which targets to bomb, would have been insane. No one would think that that would possibly work. No one thought that would work. And yet, here we are. This is what's happening, and no one honestly understands why it's working the way it is. So again, all of us can play the role. All of us can become more informed and actually make decisions as human beings, not just as passive recipients.
I want to add to that and make a quick plug too. Get involved in local government and efforts that are happening here. You don't need to like run for office, but get involved in what's happening, because a lot of these systems are also being deployed at smaller levels. We're getting issues with surveillance cameras being deployed even in Boulder County. So you can get involved and actually have a say in how it's happening here, and then that does impact decisions that happen, especially with companies and things like that. We have 3 minutes left, and so I do want to end on an optimistic note. We have a few questions actually asking, what does make you feel optimistic? And we'll just go down the line in whichever order you guys want to go.
Oh,
I think I can start. For me, what makes me optimistic is talking to students. And initially, I was very worried about how students would use artificial intelligence. And I never blamed them for it because I understood that the world is on fire, you're graduating into a terrible job market. Of course, you're gonna want to cognitively, you're gonna offload things to a system that can give you any answer to any question so that you can go have fun with your friends. I totally get it. But any time that I now have conversations with students, I am amazed at how critically they think about what this means for them and how they engage with these technologies and how they see both the benefits but also the risks. And so for all the students in this room, please continue to think critically. I know it is so difficult right now and that prospects look bleak oftentimes, but you are still also the future. And we need more experts who exist in this age of AI and know what they're talking about so that we can continue to build on things instead of losing the skills that we work so hard to develop.
For me, what's exciting is just to actually talk to people in the tech industry and also in the hobby fields who are using AI to do incredibly interesting things. I mean, I don't think we emphasize enough how much AI has really transformed the way we understand the world. It is, to me, like a microscope or a telescope. We're now able to see things and patterns that we couldn't see before. AI has essentially solved the protein folding problem, which is an incredible achievement that simply does not get enough recognition. This is a problem that, again, when I was in college, was deemed unsolvable, that we would never be able to get a solution for it, and now we have solved it using machine learning, largely the same algorithms that power large language models. We are now seeing AI being used to decipher ancient manuscripts that could not be read. We're seeing AI being used to preserve languages that are on the verge of extinction. We're seeing AI being used to ferret out deep patterns that were invisible before. I'm very excited. I feel like the idea of using AI as a kind of new instrument to see the world in a brand new way will lead to lots and lots of wonderful human discoveries. And that is optimistic. I think it's a great thing. It's not just about AI slop. It's not just about some leader posting some AI-generated memes of himself. It's way more than that.
So I'm going to break with the AI discussion. What gives me optimism is that notwithstanding the $2 trillion nuclear modernization, which I hope gets turned around, there is a growing interest in nuclear weapons among the public in general, among students in particular, and an understanding of just how insane they really are. And so I'm hopeful that the new generation of people will have better ideas concerning the use of nuclear weapons.
I got a long list of things that make me optimistic. Canada makes me optimistic. I think Mark Carney's speech at Davos was probably the speech of the decade. And one of the things he pointed out was, as the three great powers, China, Russia, and the United States, are now cooperating in destroying the liberal global international order that, for all its flaws, all its exceptions, has prevented the carnage of the first two world wars in the first half of the century, of the 20th century, that killed 100 million people. We haven't had that because of the order we created that is now being destroyed. He says we don't have to depend on those great powers. We, the middle powers, can seize the initiative, your point, and they are doing it. You're seeing signs of life in Europe. Speaking of which, number two, Hungary makes me optimistic. How can you not look at that demonstration, both the day before the election and the day after the election, and see them rocking out to Freddie Mercury, "We Are the Champions," man, and not be optimistic? That is great stuff. The third, the rising generation of political leaders makes me optimistic. And I don't just mean Mamdani, who's credible inspiration, but I mean people like Robert Garcia, who's rising in the Democratic Party. I think the younger generation is coming up, and they're ready. If these old guys will just get off the stage and let them, maybe we'll get somewhere. And I want to say General Bob Latif makes me optimistic, because a man who controlled Cheyenne Mountain, who was at the point of the spear, for him to have this kind of attitude, this understanding of nuclear weapons, and take the position that he does, that's optimism.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's give one more round of applause for everyone. I think this is a great discussion.